When fire took everything she owned, she didn't ask for help, just wished she still had her Matrix poster. What happened next stunned her entire neighborhood, and when the man from that poster showed up in person, no one could believe what he did after knocking on her door. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. Martha Alvarez had never been the kind of woman who needed much to be happy. Her home wasn't big, but it was full of life. A single-story house with faded blue siding, cracked flower pots along the porch, and wind chimes made from old silverware that her son Leo had crafted in middle school. It sat at the end of a quiet street in Santa Clarita, California. The kind of place where neighbors waved whether they knew your name or not. Inside, every inch reflected the kind of warmth that couldn't be bought. There were family photos, stacks of thrifted books, a coffee table with one stubborn leg that wobbled unless you placed a coaster just right. And on the living room wall, hanging proudly above the television, was Martha's most treasured item. A first edition Matrix poster from 1999, signed by the cast, framed in glass. It was a gift from her brother, now gone, who had surprised her with it after standing in line at a convention she couldn't afford to attend. She'd cried when he gave it to her. "You're just like Neo," he'd told her. "Quiet, stubborn, and you never give up." She never took it down. To Martha, it wasn't about the signature. It was about a time in her life when she needed a reminder that strength could be silent, that survival didn't have to be loud. 24 years later, she still watched The Matrix at least once a year. Leo had grown up hearing the dialogue in the background like a lullaby. And then one night, it was all gone. The day had ended like any other. Dinner was leftover enchiladas. Leo had his headphones on, finishing up an online quiz for school. Martha was folding laundry and half watching the evening news. Outside, the sky had gone an odd color, a grayish bruise just before sundown, and the wind had picked up without warning. Then, just after 9:30 p.m., a sound like snapping bones echoed down the street. A transformer blew. The power flickered once, twice, then went out. Martha grabbed a flashlight, instinctively checking on Leo and their golden retriever, Rufus. The boy was fine, the dog already pacing, but as she stepped onto the porch to scan the street, she saw it. A fire had sparked near a power pole 2 houses down. It caught fast, the wind fed it like breath to a flame, and the dry yard next door lit like paper. By the time she turned to grab Leo and the dog, the crackling had turned to a roar. Flames were already at the side of their home. "Leo!" Martha shouted, her voice sharp over the noise, already grabbing a jacket and shoving their dog's leash into her pocket. "Out! Now!" He didn't argue. He'd never seen his mom look like that. Urgent, rattled, but completely focused. Smoke was creeping in under the back door as they moved. Martha didn't stop to grab her purse. Didn't think about the photo albums. Just her son, the dog, the breath in her lungs. By the time they made it to the sidewalk, neighbors were already spilling out into the street in nightgowns and slippers. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed. The fire had reached the roof of their home. Bright orange tongues flicked at the sky. People began shouting. Someone tried hosing their lawn. It was chaos, confusion, and heat. Martha could barely speak. She stood barefoot, her arms wrapped around Leo, both of them coughing, eyes stinging. Then came the worst part. Standing on the curb, watching the flames curl through the windows, she saw it. The poster. Through the front glass, still hanging proudly above the TV, the Matrix poster caught light. She turned her son's head away before it crumbled. By the time the fire trucks arrived, it was too late for their home. The blaze was under control within the hour, but the damage was complete. The entire left side of the block had been affected. At least 3 other homes had suffered partial losses. Martha's was one of the few that had burned all the way through. In the morning, all that remained was the blackened shell of the house and a foundation covered in ash. Volunteers came to help. Neighbors offered sandwiches, socks, and blankets. Leo held Rufus's leash with shaking hands. Martha tried to be brave for both of them. She'd always been good in a crisis, but this wasn't a crisis. It was a loss. A total fire-washed, nothing-left kind of loss. Later that evening, a Red Cross worker handed her a notepad and asked if there was anything she'd want to replace, anything sentimental. People had already offered second-hand furniture, clothes, even a replacement microwave. Martha paused for a long time, tapping the pen against the blank paper. Then she wrote, "I just wish I still had my Matrix poster." When the volunteer looked at her questioningly, Martha shrugged. "That thing saw me through a lot," she said, voice quiet. "It sounds silly, but it meant something." That night, as she lay on a borrowed couch in her neighbor's house, with Leo asleep beside her, she reached for her son's hand in the dark. "We'll figure it out," she whispered. Not for the first time, and not for the last. The next morning, Martha walked back to what used to be her front yard. The fire inspectors had cleared the site, marking the edges of the property with yellow tape and scorched orange spray paint. Her mailbox, somehow still standing, was charred but legible. It looked ridiculous. Upright in a field of ruin. A kind of accidental monument. She bent down and picked up a shard of ceramic. Part of a mug, maybe. She couldn't tell. Most of what had been familiar was now unrecognizable. Steel warped, wood blackened, plastic melted and pooled into strange shapes. She had imagined that when something like this happened, she'd feel anger or panic. But instead, all she felt was quiet. Not peace, not numbness, just the absence of everything else. Like the fire had burned out her emotions too. A neighbor approached and wrapped her in a hug without asking. Another handed her a brown paper bag with toiletries and socks. Someone else said there was a GoFundMe starting, but none of it registered the way she expected. Later, after answering questions from the insurance rep and talking Leo through his fears, she scrolled through her phone. The photo album app was empty. Her backup had failed months ago. She opened her social media app and, on a whim, posted a photo of the ruins. The caption was short, simple. "We lost everything, but weirdly, the thing I miss most is that Matrix poster. That thing saw me through a lot." She didn't tag anyone, didn't expect anything. It was just a moment, a truth. Then she put her phone down, let Rufus crawl up beside her, and closed her eyes. Within hours, the post quietly began to spread. Friends shared it, then strangers. Some offered to send Matrix posters. Others left kind words, memories of their own fires, losses, recoveries. Some just typed, "We see you." It wasn't pity, not exactly. It was connection. By that evening, a local news station reached out asking if she'd be willing to do a short interview. Martha declined. She didn't want cameras. She didn't want charity. What she wanted, more than she realized, was to feel like something she had lost still mattered to someone. That night, Leo asked, "What happens now?" Martha looked at the sky, dark and starless. "I don't know," she said softly, "but we're still here." And that had to be enough for now. A week passed. The smell of ash still clung to the neighborhood, even as the wind tried to carry it away. Martha had gotten used to waking up on someone else's couch, used to seeing her son sleep with the dog curled up like a small, loyal sentry at his side, used to the strange silence that filled the days after disaster. She didn't talk much, didn't complain. She helped Leo with schoolwork on a borrowed tablet and spent her mornings walking through what remained of their yard, looking for anything salvageable. A chipped plate here, a warped keychain there. Once she found a melted spoon that had belonged to her grandmother, and for a few seconds the tears came hard and fast before disappearing again. It was Leo who gently said one morning, "You should post the picture, Mom." She looked at him from across the breakfast table, confused. "What picture?" "The one you took the morning after the fire. You said it made you feel better, just getting it out. Maybe it would help someone else too." She hesitated. Social media had never been her place to share deeply, but something in his voice gave her pause. He wasn't trying to go viral. He just wanted her to be seen. So that afternoon, sitting under a neighbor's awning with a chipped coffee mug in hand, Martha opened her phone and uploaded the photo. It was simple, the charred shell of her home, with the skeleton of a couch in the foreground and a crooked mailbox standing defiantly in the ashes. She typed slowly, deliberately, "I don't need charity. I just wish I still had my Matrix poster. That thing saw me through a lot." Then she hit post. No hashtags, no tags, just her words, set free into the digital sky. For a while, nothing happened. A few friends left comments, heart emojis, prayers, shared memories of hanging out in her living room when Leo was little. One offered to dig through her garage to look for Matrix merchandise. But by evening, something had shifted. The post was shared 37 times in 2 hours. By the time Martha went to sleep, the number had crossed 100. She didn't see most of it until the next morning, when she opened her phone and blinked at dozens of notifications, messages, comments, shares. People weren't offering pity, they were responding with recognition. One person wrote, "This hit me hard. I lost my dad in 2000, and the Matrix was the first thing that made me feel like I could keep going." Another said, "That line, I just wish I still had my Matrix poster. That's how grief talks, not loud, just honest." Martha stared at the screen for a long time, unsure of what to say. She hadn't meant for any of this to happen. She had just told the truth. By midday, the post had been reshared over 1,000 times. Martha's inbox was flooded. Strangers were reaching out from across the country. Some offered Matrix posters from their own collections, creases and all. Others offered kind words, stories, or simply thanked her for being brave enough to share something so small and real. "I've never lost my house," one message read, "but I've lost parts of myself. This reminded me that grief doesn't have to roar. Sometimes it just whispers." She scrolled through the replies, overwhelmed. It wasn't fame, it wasn't pity, it was something else. Connection, from people who'd felt loss and recognized the shape of it in someone else's words. One message stood out. It came from a woman named Nia in Michigan. "I mailed you something. I know it's not the same, but I had an original Matrix poster in storage for years. I want it to be yours now. My husband and I watched that movie on our first date. He passed in 2015. I think he'd want you to have it." Martha read it twice, then again. She didn't know how to respond, didn't know what to say to someone who could give away something tied to so much memory. She typed, "Thank you, truly. I'll keep it safe." That evening, a local news station called. The young producer had seen the post trending and wanted to do a feature on Martha. She politely declined. "I'm not looking for attention," she said, keeping her voice steady. "This wasn't a campaign, it was just a moment." The producer understood but asked if they could mention her story anyway. Maybe share the quote? Martha paused, then agreed. If it helps someone else feel less alone, okay. The next morning, the story aired during the evening broadcast. A quiet segment, no dramatic music, just a still image of the ruins, her words beneath it. "I don't need charity. I just wish I still had my Matrix poster." The anchor's voice added, "In a world full of loud requests and big headlines, sometimes the most powerful stories come from those who never ask for anything at all." Martha didn't watch it live, but Leo did, and when he turned to her afterward, his eyes looked a little shinier than usual. "You said the smallest thing," he told her, "and look what happened." Martha smiled, tired but softened. "I wasn't trying to make anything happen," she said. "I just missed something that mattered." By the weekend, people had started calling her a symbol of quiet resilience. A few national outlets picked up the story. A trending thread on social media debated what it meant to miss something small, something sentimental, after losing everything. Someone reposted her image with the caption, "Grief doesn't ask for replacements, it just wants to be remembered." Even more striking, people began sharing their own stories in the comments beneath Martha's post. "My apartment burned down in college. I didn't miss the laptop. I missed the mixtape my dad made me when I was 10. I lost my dad last year. Sometimes I miss his favorite coffee mug more than I can explain. Martha read them all. Every last one. The shares kept coming, but she didn't feel famous. She felt held. She updated the post, writing only one line. "Thank you for reminding me that what we miss matters." What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that across the country, someone else had seen her story. Someone who understood grief, someone who knew what it was to lose quietly, and someone who had once worn black leather, stepped into a virtual world, and, unknowingly, changed her life from a movie screen. Keanu Reeves sat alone in his trailer between film takes, scrolling without thinking, when he saw her photo. The charred house, the crooked mailbox, that single, quiet caption. He didn't react at first, just stared, then he clicked through to read more. The second post, the comments, the stories, the messages of kindness being passed around like warmth in a cold room. He leaned back slowly, holding the phone in one hand. He didn't know this woman, but he understood what she meant. Not about the poster, about the feeling. That deep, aching sense that sometimes what we miss isn't the house or the things, but the version of ourselves that felt safe inside it. Keanu set the phone down. His assistant knocked on the trailer door a moment later, reminding him they had to leave for the next scene. "I need an hour," he said quietly. She blinked. "Is everything okay?" He nodded once. "Yeah, I just need to make a stop before we go." There was no plan yet, no press release, no PR stunt to manage. Just a man, a burned home, a woman who missed a poster, and a feeling that something needed to be done. Not loudly, just calmly. The day was typical. Gray clouds hung over Los Angeles, the kind that didn't threaten rain but made everything feel a little heavier. On set, the crew was prepping lights, checking cameras, and running over the next scene. Inside his trailer, Keanu sat quietly with a cup of lukewarm tea, scrolling through his phone to pass the time. It was supposed to be a break between lines, a moment of stillness, but then he saw it. At first, it was just the image, the charred remains of a house, the mailbox still standing like a sentinel in the ashes. And then he read the caption. "I don't need charity. I just wish I still had my Matrix poster. That thing saw me through a lot." He stopped scrolling. Something about the phrasing, the humility, the sheer emotional weight of something so small and so specific. He read it again. It wasn't a cry for help, it was just a moment of honesty. Quiet grief expressed without expectation. That's what got him. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't curated. It was real. Keanu took a breath, set his phone down, then picked it back up and read the thread of comments below. There were hundreds, people responding with empathy, with memories, with solidarity. He clicked into her profile, scrolled gently. He read the follow-up post, the one that said, "Thank you for reminding me that what we miss matters." He didn't need to know everything about her. He already knew enough. She was someone who had lost more than a home. She'd lost a piece of her past. And the way she held on to that one memory, it felt familiar. He understood. Not as an actor, but as a man who had held too many quiet losses of his own. Without a word, Keanu tapped a message to his assistant. "Can you find the woman who posted this?" Quietly. There was no intention of a headline, no social media stunt, no camera crew to follow along. He just needed to show up. Within hours, his team had confirmed her name, Martha Alvarez, 43 years old, lives, or used to live, in Santa Clarita with her son. A lifelong fan, a woman who had never tagged anyone, never asked for attention, and never tried to make her pain beautiful. That mattered to Keanu. He made one more call that night, to a friend who dealt in rare movie memorabilia. "Do you still have that original Matrix poster from '99, the one we signed at Comic-Con?" The voice on the other end paused. "I do. It's in perfect condition. Why?" Keanu didn't answer the question directly. "I'll pay whatever you want. I need it by tomorrow." The next morning, before the sun had fully broken over the skyline, Keanu stood in a quiet corner of the memorabilia shop in North Hollywood. The store wasn't open yet, but the owner had made an exception. He knew better than to ask why Keanu wanted the poster. He simply brought it out from a temperature-controlled case in the back room, carefully unrolling it across a felt-covered table. The paper was pristine, no creases, no fading, and in the lower corner, just above the black and green code cascading behind Neo, were the signatures. Carrie-Anne A. Moss, Lawrence Fishburne, the Wachowskis, and his own, scrawled in the same silver marker he'd used 24 years ago. Keanu studied the poster like he was seeing it for the first time. "It's more than a film to her," he said quietly. "It's survival." The shop owner nodded. "Most people just see value in the ink. Sounds like she saw it in the message." Keanu paid in cash. He didn't haggle, didn't ask for a discount. He took the poster, now carefully secured in a new frame, and loaded it gently into the back of his SUV. The drive to Santa Clarita was just over an hour. He didn't put on music, didn't make calls. He just drove, his fingers lightly resting on the steering wheel, the poster seat belted beside him like something sacred. The streets leading into Martha's neighborhood still smelled faintly of smoke. Some homes were untouched. Others bore the black streaks of the fire's path. A few had boarded windows. A handful had signs posted by insurance companies. Recovery was clearly underway, but slow. Keanu parked a few blocks away and walked the last part of the street on foot. No entourage, no announcement. He wore jeans, a plain black t-shirt, and a baseball cap pulled low. The framed poster was tucked under his arm. He spotted the house, or what used to be the house by the mailbox, the one that still stood. A tarp had been draped over part of the ruins. A small white tent stood nearby, where Martha and her son were sorting donated clothes with a volunteer. Their golden retriever, Rufus, barked once before flopping back down in the shade. Keanu approached slowly, letting the moment breathe. No cameras, no script, just a man walking into a story that had already begun without him. Martha looked up as he neared, brushing a strand of hair from her face, not yet realizing who he was. He smiled gently, stopping a few feet away. "Hi," he said. "I heard you missed something." Martha blinked twice, unsure if her eyes were playing tricks on her. For a split second, she couldn't speak. Her breath caught in her chest as her brain tried to catch up with what her eyes were seeing. Keanu Reeves, standing in front of her, holding a framed Matrix poster. Not a look-alike, not a prank. It was him. Real, gentle, present. Leo was the first to speak. "Mom? Dad?" Keanu stepped closer and crouched a little to meet Leo's eye level. "I'm Keanu," he said with a nod. "You must be Leo." Leo nodded slowly, stunned. Then Martha found her voice, soft and cracking. "What? What are you doing here?" Keanu smiled, that same quiet expression he wore on screen when words weren't necessary. "I read your post," he said, "and I thought, if something I was a part of meant that much to you, maybe I could give a little piece of it back." He gently handed her the framed poster. Martha took it as if it might vanish if she blinked. Her hands trembled slightly as her fingers touched the glass. She looked down at the signature, his signature, and then she started to cry. Not the kind of cry that comes with sobs or sound, the kind that just spills out. Relief, disbelief, gratitude, all tangled together in silence. Keanu didn't try to fix it. He didn't reach in awkwardly with platitudes. He just stood there beside her. After a long moment, she spoke through the tears. "This isn't just a poster," she whispered. It was the one thing that stayed with me through every hard year. I used to look at it when I didn't think I could keep going. And now?" She stopped, overwhelmed. Keanu nodded, understanding without needing her to finish. "I get it," he said. "Some things carry more than ink and paper." Behind them, the volunteer stepped away quietly, giving them space. Leo held the corner of the frame like it was something priceless. Martha looked up, her eyes shining. "Why would you come all this way? No cameras, no announcements?" Keanu gave a small shrug. Because you didn't ask for anything, and that made me want to give more. A breeze passed between them. Rufus barked once and then sat calmly at Keanu's feet. For a long time, no one said anything. They just stood in the ruins of what had been, holding onto a memory, a gesture, and something else entirely. Something unspoken, but real. It was late afternoon when the doorbell rang. Martha was folding towels in the borrowed guest room while Leo sat on the couch playing a quiet game on his phone. Rufus, their golden retriever, lifted his head but didn't bark. The house had become their temporary safe zone, owned by a neighbor who had opened her doors the moment the flames died down. The kindness still made Martha's chest ache. She didn't expect anyone. No one ever used the front door. When the second chime rang, Leo looked up. "I'll get it," he called. Martha set down the laundry and followed him, wiping her hands on the side of her jeans. She had no idea what to expect. A delivery? Another donation from a stranger? Maybe a reporter who didn't get the memo that she wasn't interested in interviews. Leo pulled open the door and froze. Standing there was a man in a black hoodie and baseball cap. No camera crew, no flashing lights, just a soft smile and a poster tube in one hand. It took Martha a second longer to register who it was, and then the breath left her lungs. Keanu Reeves, on her neighbor's porch. Leo stumbled backward, eyes wide. "No way," he whispered. You're not real." Keanu smiled, warm and unhurried. "I get that a lot," he said. Martha stepped forward slowly, unable to speak. He raised the poster tube gently and said, "I heard you lost something important." That was when the tears started. Not loud, not dramatic, just soft and sudden, rising from somewhere deep. Martha covered her mouth as if to hold in the sob that threatened. She hadn't cried like this when she saw the house burn. She hadn't cried when the news aired her words. But now, here, faced with someone she never expected to meet, holding the memory she thought she'd never touch again, she broke. Keanu didn't move too fast, didn't offer a hug or make the moment about him. He just stood there, steady and present. "May I come in?" he asked. Martha nodded, stepping aside. He entered like someone who'd visited 100 times before. Quietly, respectfully, not a guest, not a star, just a man who cared enough to come. Leo shut the door behind him, still staring. "You're really him?" the boy said, voice still full of awe. Keanu knelt slightly and handed him the poster tube. "You want to help your mom open it?" Leo looked to Martha, who nodded, still wiping her eyes. They sat together on the couch and gently slid the poster from its case. It was pristine, framed, real. Martha ran her hand across the glass like she was reconnecting with something sacred. And in a way, she was. The room felt quiet, not from a lack of conversation, but from a presence that made words unnecessary. Martha stared at the poster, still in disbelief. The frame was heavy, thick wood with a soft, matte finish. Her eyes landed on the signature. She knew it immediately. His handwriting, simple and unpretentious. She turned to Keanu. How did you even find out?" He gave a small shrug, the kind people give when they don't want credit. "I saw your post, and it stayed with me." She held the poster tighter, like she was afraid it might disappear if she looked away. "I didn't expect anyone to read that. I wasn't trying to go viral." "I know," he said. "That's what made it matter." Leo hadn't taken his eyes off Keanu. He finally broke the silence. "Are you really the guy from the movies?" Keanu turned to him with a smile. "Sometimes," he replied, "but right now, I'm just a guy with a long drive and something to deliver." They all chuckled softly. Martha leaned back, still trying to process what was happening. She looked at him again, this time not as the man from her favorite film, but as someone who had just done something deeply human. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "I know," Keanu answered gently, "but some things are worth doing anyway." Just then their host, a neighbor named Rosa, peeked in from the kitchen, eyes wide. "Is that who I think it is?" Keanu stood up politely and offered his hand. "Hi, I'm Keanu." Rosa laughed nervously and took it, starstruck but composed. "I thought I heard your voice. I watched every one of your movies," she said, half whispering, like she didn't want to break the spell. He smiled, gracious but never indulgent. The rest of the visit unfolded with a kind of quiet reverence. They didn't ask for autographs or selfies. No one called the media. Keanu didn't try to entertain. He asked about Leo's school, about Rufus, the golden retriever who eventually climbed onto his lap without invitation. He asked Martha about the neighborhood, how long they'd lived here, and what she missed most about the old house. She told him about the kitchen, the heart of it all. "We didn't have much," she said, "but we had meals, laughter, and that poster hanging right above the table. It reminded me that strength can be quiet too." Keanu nodded, listening, really listening. Leo spoke up, voice softer now. "I used to think heroes had to be loud." Keanu looked at him and said something Leo would remember for the rest of his life. Sometimes the quiet ones carry the heaviest things. As the evening sun dropped lower in the sky, its soft golden light spilled through the living room window, casting a warm hue across the framed poster now resting on the mantel. Martha had moved it there carefully, as if placing a memory back where it belonged. Keanu stood near the window, looking out at the charred skyline behind the rooftops. Smoke had long cleared, but the damage lingered. The shadows of what was lost still etched the landscape. He turned back to Martha and Rosa. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I've been in a lot of rooms filled with noise, but this one feels like healing." Rosa, wiping her hands on a dish towel, smiled softly. "It's the kind of healing that only comes from kindness." Keanu nodded. He reached into his coat pocket and handed Martha a small envelope. "This isn't for publicity," he said. "There's no logo, no paperwork, but there's a number on the back for someone I trust. They help people rebuild, quietly." Martha opened the envelope gently. Inside was a handwritten note. At the bottom, a contact name and a line that read, "Use this however you need." She didn't ask how much. She didn't need to. Her eyes welled again. Not because of the amount, but because of what it meant. "You don't even know me," she whispered. "I don't have to," he said. "I just saw someone who reminded me why it matters to care." The room went still. Leo looked between his mother and the man who only hours ago had been nothing more than a name on a movie poster. He saw something different now. Not a celebrity, not an icon, but a man who noticed, who showed up. As the visit wound down, Keanu stood to leave. Rufus followed him to the door, tail wagging lazily. Before stepping out, he looked back one last time. "I'm glad the poster found its way home." Martha smiled, holding the frame against her chest like a heartbeat. "It did more than that," she said. "It brought part of me back too." He nodded once, opened the door and stepped out into the fading light. There was no entourage waiting, no flash of paparazzi, just silence. And in that silence, something sacred had passed between them. Martha stood in the doorway long after he'd gone, Leo beside her, both of them watching the street as if something magical might happen again. And in a way, it already had. After the poster had been placed gently on the mantel, after the initial disbelief had settled into something steadier, Martha invited Keanu to sit down for a bit. Not as a guest of honor, not as a celebrity, just as someone who had shown up. He accepted with a quiet nod and followed her and Leo into the small side den of the borrowed house. Rosa had set up tea on a low table, nothing fancy, just a couple of mismatched mugs and a warm kettle with chipped paint on the handle. They sat down together. The conversation didn't rush. Leo asked a few shy questions about his favorite movies, which Keanu answered with gentle humor. But then, the room settled into something deeper. Martha reached beside the couch and pulled up a slightly melted plastic container. It had survived the fire somehow. Scorched on one side, the lid warped, but what it held had escaped the worst of the flames. She opened it slowly. Inside were photographs, some curled at the edges, others slightly smudged from smoke, but each one held a piece of their life. A vacation at the beach, Leo at 6 with a missing front tooth, a blurry birthday cake, Rufus as a puppy in a shoebox. "This was our life," she said, voice soft but steady. "We didn't have a lot, but it was ours. I know it sounds silly, but I always thought, if I could just keep the memories, maybe the rest wouldn't hurt as bad." Keanu leaned forward, studying the images with reverence. "It doesn't sound silly at all," he replied. "I've held on to less for more meaning." She looked at him then, eyes searching, not for validation, but for understanding. And she found it. He didn't offer advice, he didn't try to fix anything, he just listened. That alone felt like a gift. Martha sifted through a few more photos before setting them aside. "I used to tell Leo," she said, smiling at her son, "that our house wasn't made of bricks. It was made of love and laughter, and maybe too many reruns of Speed." Keanu chuckled softly. "That's a solid foundation." The three of them shared a quiet laugh. Then Keanu reached into his coat pocket once more and pulled out something wrapped in brown paper. He handed it to Martha. She hesitated, then slowly opened the bundle. Inside was the same Matrix poster she had already seen, but this time with something extra. Below his signature, in Keanu's unmistakable handwriting, were 2 lines. "For the fighter in the fire. Neo believes in you, so do I." Martha didn't speak. She couldn't. Her hands trembled again, but not from grief. This time it was from something else. Hope. Leo leaned closer, reading the handwritten message twice. His eyes widened. "You really wrote that?" he asked. Keanu nodded, his voice low. "I meant it." Martha held the poster against her chest, her heart pounding in her ears. It wasn't just a gift. It was a message that reached deeper than any donation ever could. I don't know what to say," she finally whispered. "You don't have to say anything," Keanu replied gently. "Sometimes just being here is enough." Rosa peeked in from the hallway again, carrying a tray with small plates of cookies. "I thought maybe you all could use something sweet." Keanu stood to help her set them down, offering a quiet thank you as he did. Once everyone had something to nibble on, the conversation moved again, this time toward what came next. "We're staying here for now," Martha said. "But they say it could take months to clear the insurance. Rebuilding feels like a dream too far away to chase." Keanu didn't flinch at her honesty. "I've learned," he said slowly, "that sometimes rebuilding doesn't start with a house. It starts with just one thing. One photo. One conversation. One reminder that someone sees you." Martha looked at him, her throat tightening. "Is that what this is?" she asked, holding up the poster. "Just one thing?" "It's the first thing," Keanu said. "The rest will come. You've already survived the worst of it." Leo nodded slowly, as if the words were working their way into him, rearranging something he hadn't been able to name. "I didn't think people really did stuff like this," he said. "Most don't," Rosa chimed in, half joking but entirely sincere. "But your mom didn't ask for help. She just missed something, and somehow that mattered." Keanu reached for his tea, sipped, then added thoughtfully, "People think helping means fixing, but sometimes it just means noticing." The group fell quiet for a moment. Outside, a few neighbors passed by on the sidewalk, unaware of who sat inside. It didn't matter. What mattered was what had been restored in this room: dignity, memory, and the fragile beginning of something new. Martha looked down at the poster once more. "I used to think I had to be strong by holding it all in, pretending I was fine. But I think strength might be letting people see you." Keanu nodded. "It is." Leo got up and crossed the room, picking up one of the salvaged photo prints from the album. It was a picture of him and his mom on Halloween, dressed as Neo and Trinity. He was only 9 then, his glasses slightly too big, Martha's trench coat clearly borrowed. He held it up and said, "This was my favorite night." Martha smiled. "You made me rewatch the movie 3 times that week. Said I needed to Walk cooler." Keanu laughed. "You pulled it off better than I ever did." Leo beamed, and something subtle but powerful shifted in the room. It no longer felt like a place between what was lost and what might come. It felt, just for that moment, whole. Martha rose from her seat and carefully placed the framed poster beside the photo album on the coffee table. She looked at Keanu, not with admiration, not even with awe, but with something deeper. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Not just for the poster, for showing up, for seeing us." Keanu nodded once. "You saw yourself first. That's where it starts." He stood, the visit nearing its natural end. No one rushed it, no one tried to stretch it out. Some moments last because they're allowed to finish gently. As Keanu made his way toward the door, Rufus trotted alongside him, tail wagging. At the threshold, Keanu turned back and looked at the photo album one last time. "If you ever need anything," he said to Martha, "just remember, sometimes the smallest thing can become the anchor." She nodded, eyes wet but full of something new. Not just gratitude, not just relief. Belief. Leo walked him out to the sidewalk, where the SUV still sat parked under the shade of an old oak tree. As Keanu opened the door, Leo said, "I want to be like you when I grow up." Keanu paused, then placed a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. "You already are," he said. "You stayed, you helped your mom. That's the hard part." Leo swallowed hard and nodded. The SUV pulled away slowly, blending into the quiet street, as if it had always been part of it. Back inside, Martha picked up the poster again and ran her fingers along the edge of the frame. Below the signature, she whispered the words aloud. "For the fighter in the fire." She looked at Leo, who was now back on the couch, Rufus curled at his feet. "Neo believes in you, so do I." And for the first time since the flames took their home, Martha believed it too. After saying goodbye to Martha and Leo, Keanu didn't leave immediately. Instead, he turned back to Rosa, who was still standing near the porch, and asked softly, "Would it be all right if I took a walk around the block?" She blinked, surprised, then nodded. "Of course. Most of the neighbors are out today, cleaning, salvaging, whatever they can." So Keanu tucked his hands into his jacket pockets and began walking. The streets of Santa Clarita looked peaceful from a distance, sunlit, lined with trees and trimmed grass. But up close, the scars from the fire were unmistakable. One house had a blackened roof and windows sealed with plywood. Another had only a skeletal frame left, surrounded by yellow caution tape and the charred remains of children's bicycles on the lawn. Across the road, a woman knelt beside a flower bed, digging through the soil with gloved hands, trying to salvage any living root. She glanced up as Keanu passed, but didn't say anything. He nodded respectfully and kept moving. The sidewalk curved gently, and near the end of the block, he saw a man sitting on a porch step. His cane rested beside him, one hand gripping the wooden rail. He wore an old Dodgers cap, and his eyes, though tired, were alert. Keanu approached slowly. "Mind if I sit for a minute?" The man squinted. You're that movie fella, ain't you?" Keanu gave a quiet smile. "Sometimes." The man chuckled and gestured to the step beside him. "Well, go on then. Just don't expect me to ask for a picture. I'm too old to fuss over anyone but my grandkids." Keanu sat. "I'm Keanu. Name's Jenkins," the man said, "but most folks around here just call me Mr. J." Keanu nodded and glanced around. "You live here long?" 39 years, Mr. Jenkins said. "Raised 3 kids in that house before they scattered like dandelions. I was just about to fix the roof when the fire came." He pointed with his cane toward the edge of the porch, where scorch marks crawled up the wood like black veins. "Fire started 2 blocks over," he added. "We smelled smoke and ran out before the wind carried it to us. Some didn't make it in time." Keanu looked down the street again. From here, he could see 6, maybe 7 homes in various stages of damage. Some still standing but broken, others barely recognizable. "You all doing okay?" Keanu asked quietly. Mr. Jenkins gave a half shrug. "We're not asking for handouts," he said. "Just hope." Keanu let those words settle. Not a plea, not a complaint. Just the truth, offered with dignity. He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable, but his silence full of promise. Mr. Jenkins leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees as he stared at the cracked sidewalk in front of them. "You know, the hardest part isn't the stuff we lost," he said. "It's watching the young folks try to smile through it. Like Leo and his mama. You saw them, right?" Keanu nodded. "I did. They're strong." Mr. Jenkins tapped his cane lightly on the porch rail. "Too strong, maybe. Sometimes strength looks like silence, and silence can feel like being forgotten." Keanu turned that over in his mind. From across the street, a small voice called out, "Hey, Grandpa!" A girl no older than 7 came running barefoot down a driveway, her pink shirt streaked with dirt. She paused when she saw Keanu, eyes wide, then tiptoed closer. "This is Keanu," Mr. Jenkins said. "He's visiting." The girl waved shyly. "And Zoe," she whispered. Keanu smiled gently. "Nice to meet you, Zoe." She pointed at the patch of black grass behind her. "That's where our trampoline used to be. It melted." Keanu's smile faded a bit, and he crouched down beside her. "I'm really sorry that happened." Zoe nodded solemnly, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a marble, placing it in Keanu's hand. "It's the only one that didn't crack. You can keep it for luck." Keanu looked at the tiny swirl of color in his palm. Something about it struck him. A fragment of childhood, spared by chaos. He placed his other hand over it. "Thank you. That means a lot." Zoe beamed and skipped back across the street. Keanu turned back to Mr. Jenkins. "Huh, that was her only toy that survived?" "Pretty much," Mr. Jenkins said. "They were renting, didn't have insurance. Her mom's been staying with her sister. It's been rough." Keanu stood up slowly, eyes scanning the entire block again. He noticed small things others might overlook, like how all the windows on one home were broken out, but the blinds had been rehung, or the way a tarp had been tied over a roof, weighed down with bricks, clearly done by someone who wasn't a roofer, but who had tried anyway. These weren't just damaged homes. They were lives caught in pause. Mr. Jenkins stood with effort and extended his hand. "Whatever you do, thanks for taking the time to walk with us." Keanu shook his hand. "Time's the least I can give." As he walked away, the marble still in his hand, Keanu didn't make any calls. He didn't issue any promises. But every face, every voice, he carried them with him. And something inside had already decided. This wouldn't end with just one family. Keanu continued his walk past a house with missing siding and a handwritten "We're okay" sign taped to the mailbox. The smell of ash still lingered in the air, though the fires had been out for weeks. The neighborhood felt like it was trying to breathe again, but each breath was shallow, uncertain. A woman was sweeping soot off her porch with an old broom, her movements slow but steady. She gave Keanu a brief glance and a tired nod. He nodded back and didn't intrude. At the next corner, he saw a boy about Leo's age adjusting a blue tarp over what used to be a garage. It was makeshift, held down with bungee cords and bricks, but it was something. The boy paused and looked at Keanu curiously but said nothing. Keanu just said, "Looks like it'll hold for now," and kept walking. The boy smiled faintly and went back to work. Each interaction stitched another piece of the story together. This wasn't just Martha's tragedy. It was a quiet tapestry of resilience, woven by people who had no headlines, no microphones, no interviews, just grit. When he made his way back to Rosa's porch, she was waiting with a glass of water. "You've seen it now," she said, handing it to him. Keanu drank slowly, then looked out over the street. "Yeah," he replied, "and I can't forget it." Rosa nodded. "Most don't see us at all. They think Santa Clarita's all sunshine and hills. But this," she gestured toward the burnt rooftops, "this is where the real stories are." He took another sip, his thoughts turning. What if people didn't have to rebuild alone? He asked quietly. Rosa tilted her head. "You mean charity?" "No," Keanu replied. "I mean dignity, choice, Support that feels like respect, not rescue. Rosa considered that. Then you'd be doing something different. That's the plan. He didn't say it out loud, but his mind was already racing. About foundations he quietly supported, people he could call, ways to help without making it about him. Before he left, he asked one more question. Do you know the names of the families on this block who were hit the hardest? Rosa nodded. I can get you a list. Keanu smiled. That would be a good start. He thanked her, took one last look at the street, and began walking back to his car. The marble from Zoe was still in his pocket. He kept turning it between his fingers as he walked. So small, so simple, but it had survived the fire. And in Keanu's mind, that meant something. Maybe hope didn't need to shout. Maybe it just needed to stay. The room was quiet when Keanu stepped back into his hotel suite just past sunset. The curtains were drawn, casting soft shadows across the floor. He placed the marble Zoe had given him on the nightstand, then sat down at the edge of the bed, elbows resting on his knees. He stared at the floor for a long while, not because he didn't know what to do, because he did, and he wanted to get it exactly right. He reached for his phone and scrolled until he found the number. No publicists, no assistants, just one contact labeled simply, Gabe, Rebuild Network. He tapped the screen. The line rang twice. Keanu, a voice answered, groggy but alert. Sorry it's late, Keanu said. You busy? I'm in Vancouver, but you're never just checking in. What's going on? Keanu leaned back and exhaled. I met someone today. A family, actually. A mom, her son, lost their house in a fire. But it's not just them. It's a whole street. Santa Clarita? Yeah, big one. I saw something about it last week. No casualties, but the damage was rough. Keanu nodded slowly, though no one could see it. They're trying to put their lives back together, quietly, with grace, but they're doing it alone. Gabe was silent for a second. Then he said, You want to do something? I already did something, Keanu replied, but it's not enough. They need more. How many homes? At least 6 families. One's already couch surfing, another has kids sleeping in a garage. They're not asking for handouts, Gabe, they're just asking for a chance. I'll pull the Santa Clarita grid in the morning. We've got some discretionary funding through the Quiet Hands branch. We can deploy it under the radar. Keanu sighed in relief. I'd like to fund it myself, anonymously, if possible, through the trust. I can make that happen. We'll send out a few small crews, not big companies, people who know how to move quiet and fix fast. And let's start tomorrow, Keanu added, early, before they even have time to wonder. You got it. There was a pause, the kind only long friendships knew how to hold. Thanks for calling, man, Gabe said. I know you don't like the spotlight, but these things you do, people feel them, even if they don't know it's you. That's the point, Keanu said. He ended the call and sat in the quiet for a moment longer, letting the weight of the day fall off him in pieces. He didn't need applause. He didn't want attention. But he wanted those families to wake up to something different, to hope that came without a headline, to kindness that arrived without a name. The next morning, before the sun had fully crested the hills over Santa Clarita, the first truck arrived. It was an old white Ford with rust along the bumper and a magnetic decal that simply read, Community Fix-It Crew. No branding, no banners, no camera crews. Just 2 men in work boots, stepping out, coffee in hand, scanning the block with quiet focus. By 8 a.m., 3 more vehicles had pulled in, one hauling lumber, another stacked with insulation and roofing materials, and the third towing a small mobile tool shed. It wasn't flashy, but it was organized, efficient, ready. At Martha's temporary home, Rosa stood at her front window, eyes squinting at the unfolding activity. Martha, she called softly, you might want to see this. Martha, still in her robe, stepped up beside her and followed her gaze. Across the street, one of the burned homes had a ladder leaned against its side. A man was already up on the roof, carefully removing damaged shingles. Another worker was clearing debris from a porch. A woman knelt by the mailbox, checking structural damage to the foundation post. Marta blinked. "Did the city send someone?" she asked. "I don't think so," Rosa said. "No logos, no county trucks." Then they noticed the crews fanning out to more homes. Mr. Jenkins was already on his porch, nodding slowly as a younger man with a clipboard explained something. A few houses down, Zoe's mother stood speechless as a woman handed her a printed timeline of restoration steps. Martha stepped onto the porch. "Excuse me," she called across the street. One of the workers looked up. "Morning, ma'am." "Who sent you?" The man smiled. "We're just here to help. You're on the list." "What list?" "Families affected by the fire." "That's all we know. But how did you find us?" The worker shrugged kindly. "A sponsor reached out, said we'd know where to go. We've got instructions to begin with minor repairs and work our way up. No charge, no paperwork, just work." Martha stood still for a moment, absorbing the words like sunlight after days of storm. Then Rosa whispered beside her, "He said yesterday this wouldn't end with just you." Martha's hand flew to her mouth. "You think this is him?" Rosa didn't answer. She didn't have to. Just then Leo joined them on the porch, still rubbing the sleep from his eyes. When he saw the trucks and the people fixing what had looked broken forever, his breath caught in his throat. "It's like they just showed up." Martha nodded, her eyes misty. They did. By mid-morning, the neighborhood hummed with a rhythm it hadn't felt in weeks. Not panic, not loss, but purpose. The crews moved house to house, not with the brusque energy of contractors rushing a job, but with the reverence of people who knew they were walking through memories. Each nail hammered was another piece of someone's story being rebuilt. Each wall scraped clean was an erasure of despair. Mr. Jenkins watched from his porch as two workers replaced the railing he had once fixed himself over a decade ago. He called out to him, "I can pitch in, you know." One of the men grinned. "You just supervise for now, sir, but we'll keep your seat warm." Across the street, Zoe skipped barefoot through the grass, pointing out where her trampoline used to be. "Maybe we can build another one," she shouted to her mom. Her mother didn't respond, too busy wiping away tears as she stared at the men loading new drywall onto their porch. Rosa wandered down the block, asking each team questions, checking in like a quiet sentinel. She noticed the work was evenly divided, no favoritism, no fanfare. Everyone who had lost something was getting something back. At Martha's side, Leo pulled gently on her sleeve. "Mom, do you think Keanu did this?" She looked down at him. "I think he started something. But look around, sweetheart." Leo turned his head slowly, taking in the repaired fences, the neighbor who was laughing again, the broken mailboxes now upright. "It's not just him anymore," she said softly. And that was the truth. Whatever Keanu had done, it had ignited something deeper, quietly, without headlines. It was as if he had passed along the match, and now the fire was one of healing. Back at the hotel, Keanu sat with a fresh coffee in hand, watching the sunrise. His phone buzzed with a photo. Martha and Leo, standing outside, smiling with dust on their clothes and brightness in their eyes. No caption, just the image. He tapped the screen, saved the photo to a folder labeled Unshared. Then he opened a notebook and jotted down 6 names. First names only. Mr. J. Zoe, Martha, Leo, Rosa, Gabe. Beside them, he wrote, "Sometimes helping isn't about being seen. It's about letting others feel seen again." He closed the notebook and placed it beside the marble. Then he sat back and listened to the quiet. There would be no interviews, no announcements. Only change, subtle and lasting. The kind that begins with a call in the dark and ends with the sound of hammers on rooftops, children laughing in yards, and neighbors saying thank you. To no one in particular. Because sometimes the best kind of help doesn't leave a name. It leaves a new beginning. 3 days after the crews first arrived, the neighborhood had begun to find its rhythm again. The sound of hammers and drills no longer startled the residents. It comforted them. Children began to play outside again. People stepped onto their porches with mugs of coffee and a little more hope than before. Martha had just finished sweeping her borrowed front porch when she noticed something odd. An envelope. No stamp, no name, just a plain, cream-colored envelope taped carefully to the doorframe. She stared at it for a few seconds before pulling it loose. There was no weight to it, just a few sheets of folded paper inside. She stepped back inside, called Leo over, and sat down at the kitchen table. He stood beside her, curious as she opened it. The first thing she saw was a folded note, handwritten in clean, deliberate letters. It said, "For the street that stood together." No signature, no logo, no flourish. She unfolded the paper behind it and froze. It was a check. A real one, made out to the Vista Court Neighborhood Association. The amount written in neat script, $75,000, 0 cents. Martha blinked hard, convinced she'd read it wrong. She held it up to the light. It was legitimate, from a private foundation she didn't recognize. But the account matched one she had vaguely seen in small print acknowledgments on rebuilding signs in the past. Leo leaned over her shoulder. "Mom, that's for here, right? For the neighborhood?" Martha nodded slowly, her breath shaky. "Yes, it is." "But from who?" She looked down at the note again. The message was clear, the style was familiar, and yet it didn't scream for attention, just like someone else she'd met recently. She pressed her lips together, emotions rising fast in her chest. "It doesn't say," she whispered, but they both knew. There was no doubt in her heart. She reached over to the bookshelf, recently salvaged from her old home, and carefully pulled the framed poster from its resting place. It was still wrapped in protective plastic, just as Keanu had left it. She placed the envelope and the note beside it, resting her fingers gently on top. Whoever did this hadn't just sent help. They had noticed. They had remembered. Leo sat across from her, watching her eyes well with quiet tears. "You okay, Mom?" She nodded. "Yeah, I didn't think we'd be seen, not like this." Leo was silent for a moment. Then he smiled softly. "He saw us." She met his eyes and smiled back. "Yeah, he did." The news of the envelope spread slowly, starting with Rosa. Martha walked across the street, holding it carefully like something sacred. She showed Rosa the check first, then the note. Rosa read it twice before sitting down heavily on her porch step. "He really did all this?" she asked, more to herself than to Martha. "I think so," Martha replied. "But he didn't say. He didn't sign the note, didn't want credit." Rosa chuckled quietly. "Of course he didn't. That man, he could have just sent an autograph and moved on. But he showed up, and then he stayed, and now this." By mid-afternoon, the other neighbors knew too. Mr. Jenkins tipped his hat and said, "Never thought a movie star would do more for this street than our own city council." He smiled, then returned to sanding the newly replaced deck outside his home. The check was deposited by the neighborhood association that week. With no red tape to tangle through and no publicity to manage, the funds were used immediately. A local nonprofit was contacted, and with their help, temporary housing was arranged for the last displaced family. A long-abandoned community garden was approved for restoration. Fencing went up around it within 48 hours. And for the first time in weeks, laughter returned. Not cautious, but real. Children helped clear weeds in the garden. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years leaned on the same shovels, working side by side. Someone brought sandwiches. Someone else brought a speaker. Music played. Someone passed out cold bottles of water, and for a moment, no one talked about the fire. They talked about the future. That night, after everyone had gone home and the stars emerged above the quiet street, Martha sat on her porch holding the note again. For the street that stood together. It wasn't just a message, it was a mirror. A reminder that no matter how bad things got, they hadn't fallen apart. They'd held each other up. She walked back inside and taped the note beside the poster. Not to idolize it, but to anchor it. To remember the moment not when they were saved, but when they were seen. Leo came in a few minutes later, dragging an old sleeping bag he insisted on using even though his mattress had finally arrived. He paused by the framed poster, now flanked by the envelope. "Do you think he'll come back?" he asked. Martha didn't hesitate. "Maybe. But even if he doesn't, he left something better." Leo looked puzzled. "Like what?" She smiled gently. "Hope." The next morning, Martha woke early. The neighborhood was quiet again, but different now. There was something settled in the silence, something peaceful. She made coffee and stood at her window, watching the sun rise over the street that had once felt lost. The home still bore the scars of fire, but they no longer looked abandoned. They looked lived in, mended, alive. Later that day, a small envelope appeared at the community bulletin board by the mailboxes. This one had no address, just the words, "To the hands who helped." Inside was a short note, again unsigned. "Kindness is contagious. Keep passing it on." It wasn't from Keanu, that much Martha was sure of. The handwriting was different and the tone more playful, but the spirit was the same. Rosa found it first and posted a photo of it to the neighborhood's small Facebook group. The replies came quickly. A neighbor offered extra garden tools. Someone else posted, "I've got spare paint if anyone's touching up trim." Another offered to bake cookies for the next group cleanup. It wasn't about the check anymore, or the poster, or even the fire. It was about what had bloomed in the ashes. By the end of the week, a new sign had been hammered into the fence by the garden. "Vista strong, est after the fire." Someone had drawn a tiny fox in the corner of the sign with chalk. Just a little symbol, easy to miss. But Martha saw it. She smiled and shook her head. Whoever's behind all this sure knows how to whisper loud. Later that evening, she took a photo of the sign, printed it, and placed it behind the poster, in the frame Keanu had brought. Not to replace what had been lost, but to build on what had been found. That night, Leo asked if he could write something on the back of the poster's frame. Martha handed him a marker without asking questions. He printed 5 words in neat block letters. "We matter, all of us do." Martha didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The poster had seen her through a lot, but what meant more now was what had been written around it, layer by layer, by people who'd walked through the fire together. Kindness wasn't just a gift. It was a chain reaction. And whoever had started it, Keanu, the rebuilders, the silent donor, or the child who drew the fox, had done something far greater than fix homes. They reminded a forgotten street that they were never invisible to begin with. Martha turned off the lights and looked at the poster one last time before bed. Underneath the note and the photo, the fox drawing and Leo's words, it didn't feel like a movie memento anymore. It felt like proof. Someone out there had seen them. 3 weeks after the garden sign went up and the neighborhood repairs hit full stride, an email arrived in Martha's inbox. It was from Leo's school principal. They were planning a special assembly, one focused on resilience, kindness, and rebuilding after hardship. The idea came from one of the teachers who had followed Martha's story on the local news and heard about what happened on Vista Court. Would she be willing to speak? Martha hesitated. She wasn't a public speaker, she was a mother, a former waitress, a woman who had survived something awful and stumbled into something extraordinary. Still, after talking with Leo, she agreed. The day of the assembly, the school gym buzzed with restless energy. Folding chairs lined the floor, filled with middle schoolers slouched in hoodies and sneakers, arms crossed or fingers tapping at their phones. Teachers stood along the sides, some trying to keep the energy calm, others letting the noise run its course. At the front of the room stood a podium with a blue and yellow school banner. A projection screen behind it showed the day's theme, Community Strength, Stories That Stay. Martha stood backstage with Leo, adjusting the simple silver necklace she always wore. Her palms were damp. Her breath came quick. "You okay?" Leo asked. She smiled nervously. "I think so." "You're going to be great," he said, his voice steady in a way that sounded older than his years. She squeezed his hand and nodded. When the principal stepped up to the mic and introduced her, there wasn't much fanfare, just a few polite claps, some indifferent shrugs. But the moment Martha stepped out and took the microphone, something shifted. She didn't read from a paper, she didn't lecture. She spoke like someone who had lived every word she was about to say. "I never planned to be here," she began, "and I certainly never planned to become someone with a story worth telling. But sometimes, life doesn't ask what you're ready for. It just hands you the next chapter." She talked about the fire, about the smell of smoke in her son's hair, about watching the home they'd built go up in flames and holding his hand in the dark as they watched it crumble. But then she turned a corner. She told them about the neighbors, about the garden, about the mysterious crews that just showed up, and she told them about something even more unexpected. Not the help, but the feeling of being seen. "Sometimes we think strength is about standing tall," she said, "but real strength is letting others stand beside you." The room grew still. Even the fidgeting kids up front sat a little straighter. Martha didn't talk about Keanu Reeves. Not once. She didn't need to. What mattered wasn't who helped, it was how help had come, quietly, without condition, without ego. She talked about what it meant to lose everything and still find community. How sometimes the most important thing you can do for someone isn't to fix their problem, but to remind them they're not invisible. "We lived in a hotel room for a while," she said. "It was cramped. Our dog kept barking at every hallway noise. We didn't have a kitchen, but we had each other. And we had neighbors who didn't give up." She paused and looked toward the back row where Leo sat. "And sometimes," she said softly, "your kid ends up teaching you what strength really is." There was a quiet moment of stillness. Then, as planned, Leo stood up and made his way to the podium. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his hoodie pocket and looked out at his classmates. "I wasn't going to read this," he said, "but Mom told me to be brave, so here goes." A small laugh rippled through the room. He cleared his throat and began. "My name is Leo Alvarez, and this is called The Day Neo Came to Dinner." Instantly, the room buzzed. A few kids whispered, "No way." Leo raised a hand. "Let me explain." He started from the night of the fire, in his own words, funny, honest, and raw. He described waking up to the smell of smoke, grabbing his dog, running barefoot through the lawn, and watching the sky turn orange. Then he described the days that followed, the cramped hotel, his mom trying to stay strong, the way their street looked like something from a disaster movie. And then, he said, eyes twinkling, there was a knock at the door. He paused for effect. Let's just say, if you've ever imagined Neo showing up in real life, carrying a poster tube and wearing that "I'm about to change your life" face, it's even cooler than you think. Laughter erupted. Teachers chuckled. Even the principal leaned forward, smiling. Leo went on. But the best part wasn't the poster, it was what he did after. He sat down, he listened. He didn't make it weird, he made it normal. Like we were people again, not just a headline. He folded the paper, looked at the audience, and added, "And maybe that's what heroes really do. They make you feel seen when the world's gone dark." Silence. Then applause. Sincere and strong. As the applause continued, Leo stepped down from the stage and rejoined his classmates, his face flushed but smiling. Martha was still near the podium, her hands gently clasped together, tears quietly gathered at the corners of her eyes. The principal returned to the mic, visibly moved. "Thank you, Martha and Leo," he said. "That was more than we expected. It was exactly what we needed." Students filed out of the gym slowly, some still glancing back. A few gave Leo quiet thumbs up or shoulder taps. One of the teachers stopped Martha and shook her hand firmly. "You reminded them that resilience isn't just something grown-ups talk about. It's something they can live," she said. Later that day, Leo's English teacher pulled him aside. "Would you mind if I shared your essay with the rest of the school in our newsletter?" she asked. Leo shrugged, but smiled. "Sure. Just don't fix my jokes. They're the best part." That evening, as they sat on the couch together, dog curled up at their feet, tea steaming on the coffee table, Martha looked over at her son. "You made them laugh," she said, "and then you made them think." Leo leaned back, arms behind his head. "That's kind of the point, right?" She nodded. "You did good." He turned toward her. "You did better." She chuckled and shook her head. "Nope, this was all you." Outside the window, the neighborhood was quiet again. But it was a different kind of quiet, the kind where things grow. The essay spread farther than they expected. Other schools asked permission to use it in their own assemblies. A teacher from across the state sent a message saying it reminded her students that real strength doesn't need a cape. It just needs a heart. And while Leo never said the name Keanu Reeves out loud during his speech, it didn't matter. Everyone understood who he meant. The story, like the fire, had started in one place, but its warmth spread. And something else happened too. Something no one expected. A few days after the assembly, Leo came home from school with a strange look on his face. He dropped his backpack and held up a small envelope with no return address. Inside, a card. On the front, a sketch of a dinner table with 3 chairs. Inside, one line, handwritten. "Dinner's still my favorite scene." Leo blinked, read it again, then handed it to Martha without a word. She read it and smiled. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't loud. Just like everything else that had followed the fire. Quiet, kind, real. She slid the card behind the frame of the poster, now surrounded with tokens of their new life. Garden photos, letters from neighbors, and one unforgettable school essay. The house had burned down, but the story? It had only just begun. The Santa Clarita sky had just begun to melt into soft streaks of pink when a nondescript black SUV pulled onto Vista Court. The street looked different now. New siding on the houses, fresh garden beds sprouting with tomatoes and marigolds, a painted bench near the community garden with "Vista Strong" etched into the backrest. It had been nearly 4 months since the fire, and 3 since Keanu Reeves had last walked this road. But here he was again. No entourage, no announcement, no cameras. He parked discreetly at the end of the street, beneath the shade of an old pepper tree. He wore a gray hoodie, jeans, and a cap pulled low, just enough to keep recognition at bay. In his hand, he carried a small box, no bigger than a shoebox, wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. But he didn't knock, didn't ring a bell. Instead, he stepped quietly onto Martha's newly rebuilt porch, admired the fresh white paint, the flower pots arranged neatly at the railing, the wind chimes that danced gently with the breeze. The welcome mat read, "Still standing." He smiled at that. Then, with great care, he placed the box near the door. Inside was a hand-carved fox, delicately shaped from walnut wood, smooth to the touch, no paint, just natural grain. Nestled next to it was a folded note, handwritten in calm, slanted script, for the home rebuilt from ashes, from a friend who believes in second chances. He stood there for a moment longer, hands in his pockets, gaze steady. There was no need to wait for someone to find it. That wasn't the point. Keanu turned, walked back to his car, and drove off before the sun had fully dipped. Later that evening, Martha stepped outside to water the porch flowers. It had been a good day. Leo had aced a science quiz, the dog had stopped chewing the edge of the couch, and someone had donated books to the neighborhood's new mini library. She was humming softly, barefoot in her worn house slippers, when she spotted the box by the door. Her brow furrowed. She picked it up carefully, untied the string, and peeled back the paper. Her hand stilled when she saw what was inside. She didn't cry, not right away. She simply stared at the little fox, so thoughtfully carved, its tail curled to one side, head tilted slightly like it was listening. She lifted the note, read it twice. A breath caught in her chest. Then, quietly, she said to the air, "You didn't have to." But something in her heart whispered back, he did it anyway. Martha brought the fox inside with the kind of reverence people reserve for heirlooms. She didn't know how long she stared at it before setting it on the mantel above the fireplace. It sat between a framed photo of her and Leo and a small potted plant that had survived the fire. One of the only things they'd managed to rescue from the garden before the flames took over. The note went in a wooden box where she kept other quiet treasures: the letter from Leo's school, the card with the dinner table sketch, and the first handwritten message that had come with the poster. She didn't text anyone, didn't post about it. She didn't need to. The next morning, she told Leo only that a friend had left something for us. He walked into the living room, saw the fox, and immediately knew. There were no dramatic reactions, no excited yelling. He just stood in front of the mantel for a long time, hands in his pockets, and finally said, "I like it." Martha walked over, rested her chin briefly on his shoulder. "I think we were supposed to." That evening, when the sun dipped behind the hills and the sky turned to a soft lavender, they sat on the porch together, dog curled between their feet, a small radio playing music from the kitchen window. It felt whole. It felt like their life had finally clicked back into place. Not in the same shape it was before, but in something stronger, wiser, softer around the edges. And though neither of them said it out loud, they both knew the fox wasn't just a gift. It was a memory, a reminder, a promise. A few days later, Leo took a picture of it and printed a copy to hang on the hallway bulletin board near the front door. Beneath the photo, he wrote, "Some heroes leave capes. Ours left a fox." Visitors asked about it sometimes. Friends from the neighborhood would glance up, eyebrows raised. "What's the story behind this one?" And Martha would smile, never confirming, never denying. Just something someone left us, someone who understood. When Rosa came by to borrow garden gloves, she saw the fox and whispered, "It looks like it's watching over you." "It is," Martha said, "but not just us." Because in truth, that small statue didn't just belong to their family. It belonged to everyone on the street who had stayed, helped, rebuilt, and believed. And though it didn't make noise, didn't move, didn't shine, it carried something bigger than all that. It carried the story. It started with a paintbrush. A little girl named Evie, no more than 8, stood in front of what used to be a scorched wooden fence along the corner lot. Her house had been one of the last to be rebuilt, but today, with a pink bandana in her hair and a bucket of sky blue paint at her feet, she was ready to finish the story. With the help of her older brother, she outlined a sunflower taller than herself. Soon, other children joined, some from the block, some from neighboring streets. By noon, the old fence had transformed into a canvas filled with bright shapes, handprints, rainbows, stars, and words like hope, home, and together. It was the beginning of a quiet revolution. The neighborhood, once defined by loss, now pulsed with color. Next door, Mr. Jenkins could be seen crouching in his front yard, knees dusty, hands deep in soil. His garden, once choked by ash and debris, was sprouting again. Rows of tomatoes, marigolds, rosemary, and bell peppers had begun to reclaim their space. A hand-painted sign staked in the soil read, "Still growing." He wiped his brow, grumbled good-naturedly to no one in particular, then turned the soil over with a satisfied grunt. 2 doors down, neighbors were helping the Watanabe family build a new front porch. Hammers echoed rhythmically. Laughter bubbled between swings. Kids passed out lemonade in mismatched cups, while someone strummed a guitar near the sidewalk. None of it was planned. It just happened. People who hadn't spoken much before the fire were now swapping tools, recipes, childcare. Something about the collective loss had shaken off the walls between them, and what rose in their place was stronger than anything made of wood or nails. There was no official ceremony, no red ribbons, just acts of rebuilding that looked more like living. And inside Martha's newly finished living room, still smelling faintly of fresh paint and lemon cleaner, a single framed poster had found its place again. The 1999 Matrix poster, restored and reframed, now hung above the couch. But this time, it wasn't just a movie keepsake. It was a symbol of the strange, beautiful way a story can come full circle. Martha stood beneath it one morning, coffee in hand, gazing at the handwritten message beneath the printed title. For the fighter in the fire, Neo believes in you, so do I. She touched the edge of the frame gently, smiled, and whispered, "Still standing." The dog barked from the hallway. Leo came out with bedhead and a crumpled hoodie, mumbling something about cereal. She chuckled. "Kitchen's open." Outside, the sun filtered through the slats of the porch. A new day waited. The view from the porch had changed, but it was more than physical. The air felt different now, less like the aftermath of loss and more like the middle of something healing. Driveways had new pavement, gardens were growing, and in the middle of the block stood a new community notice board, crafted from salvaged wood by a few of the dads who had met through cleanup efforts. On the board were handwritten notes, some anonymous. Thanks to whoever brought the canned food. Porch repair help needed on Saturday. Come if you can. Movie night at the corner house. Bring chairs and blankets. And right in the center, pinned by 4 silver tacks, was a photo of the mural fence Evie had started. Beneath it, in a child's handwriting, "We made something better." People weren't just fixing homes, they were rebuilding trust. That weekend, the neighborhood held its first official potluck. There were plastic folding tables set up in driveways, covered in mismatched cloths and dishes. Someone brought tamales, someone else brought pie. Laughter rippled through the air like wind through wind chimes. Leo stood with a paper plate of macaroni in one hand, his other waving across the street at one of his classmates. A few feet away, Martha was pouring sweet tea into cups, chatting with Rosa and Mr. Jenkins about compost bins. In the middle of the gathering was a small temporary plaque made by a neighbor's teenage son. It read, "This block burned, but it didn't break." As evening fell, people gathered around fire pits and lanterns. A few older kids set up a projector against one of the rebuilt fences, and someone hit play on a movie. It wasn't The Matrix. It was something light and funny. But when Martha saw the flicker of light cast across the mural fence, she felt something click into place. She wasn't thinking about the fire anymore. She was thinking about everything that came after. And as she looked around at the people laughing, helping, sharing, and just being, she realized something important. It wasn't the return of the house that mattered most. It was the return of community. Later that night, as the last folding chair was stashed away and Leo finished rinsing out empty lemonade pitchers, Martha stepped back onto her porch and looked up at the poster through the window. Still hanging, still there, not just because of who had signed it, but because of everything it had come to mean. A few weeks later, a new family moved into the house at the end of the block. They had 2 young kids and a tired pickup truck, and they looked overwhelmed. The neighborhood watched as they unloaded boxes and tried to piece together a life from scratch. It didn't take long. The next morning, Evie and her brother walked up to their porch with a potted basil plant. Rosa brought over a plate of warm tortillas. Mr. Jenkins offered gardening tips and handed over a pair of worn gloves that had seen years of use, but still had life left in them. And Martha? She showed up last, holding a freshly laminated copy of the block's mural photo and a folded list of neighborhood contacts. "In case you need anything," she said, smiling, "we've all been there." The new family didn't ask questions. They just nodded, eyes misty. Because sometimes you don't need to know the whole story to feel the weight of its kindness. Inside Martha's house, the living room was slowly filling with new memories. The couch wasn't the same as the old one, but Leo had already left popcorn between the cushions during movie night. The new curtains didn't match, but they fluttered just right in the morning breeze. And the Matrix poster? It stood watch above it all, not as a decoration, but as a witness. One morning, Leo surprised Martha by taking a Polaroid of the living room and writing on it with a black marker, "Home 2, stronger than fire." He tucked it beside the frame of the poster. That weekend, as golden light stretched over the rooftops and laughter echoed from driveways, Keanu Reeves' gift, the signed poster, the fox, and the presence he had brought to their lives felt less like a celebrity moment and more like something sacred. He had come without spectacle. He had left behind more than memorabilia. He had given a spark to something that grew on its own, quietly, steadily, like roots beneath the soil. Martha often thought about writing him, not to thank him for the poster or the donation or even the visit, but just to tell him what he might never see, that their block was alive again, that strangers became neighbors, that burned fences turned into murals, and that sometimes the smallest acts, like showing up with a rolled-up poster, could ripple through a community and change everything. But she never did write that letter. Instead, she just kept living the story. And that was enough. The interview wasn't planned as anything special. It was part of a quiet sit-down to promote a new indie film. Low-key. No flashy backdrop, just Keanu seated across from a soft-spoken journalist in a sunlit room lined with bookshelves. The kind of setting that invited honesty, not headlines. Halfway through the interview, the tone shifted. The journalist leaned forward slightly, her voice careful but curious. "There's been some quiet buzz about your visit to Santa Clarita, the neighborhood rebuild, the anonymous donations. Can I ask, why that story?" Keanu looked down for a moment, then up again. His fingers tapped gently on the armrest, not fidgeting. Zeisted. He didn't dodge. He didn't shift into promo mode. Instead, he nodded slowly. "There was a post," he said quietly. "A woman who lost everything in a house fire. She didn't ask for money, didn't post a link. She just missed a poster." The room stayed silent. He continued. "It was this line she wrote, something like, 'I don't need charity. I just wish I still had my Matrix poster. That thing saw me through a lot.'" He paused, as if hearing it again in his head. "That hit me." The journalist gave him space. Keanu leaned back, folding his hands in his lap. "People lose everything," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "and somehow still care about the smallest things. That's strength. That's survival." She asked, "Did you expect the neighborhood to rebuild the way it did?" Keanu shook his head with a faint smile. "No, I didn't go there to fix anything. I just showed up. They did the rest." He looked toward the window for a moment, watching sunlight dance against the glass. "I think hope's like that," he said. "Not a spotlight, not a headline, just showing up, being willing. That's enough sometimes." The journalist, moved by his sincerity, pressed gently, "Why not make it public? Most people in your position would have posted about it. Let the world know." Keanu chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I didn't want to be the story. They were." He shifted in his chair, his tone growing even quieter. "You know, there was this one man I met there. Mr. Jenkins. He said, 'We're not asking for handouts, just hope.' That stayed with me." The journalist scribbled notes slowly, but her eyes stayed on him. Keanu added, "That street, those people, they reminded me why stillness matters, why showing up matters, even when no one sees it." The journalist set her notepad down. Her voice softened, taking on the weight of the moment. "You've always been known for kindness off-screen, but you rarely talk about it. Why?" Keanu tilted his head slightly, considering. "I think some things get smaller when you talk about them too much," he said. "Generosity, kindness, those aren't things you advertise. They're things you pass along." She nodded. "So you see this as paying something forward?" He smiled faintly. "I see it as returning something I never lost. That poster meant something to her, not because of who was on it, but what it represented. Maybe memory, maybe escape, maybe comfort in the middle of grief." He leaned forward a bit, voice slow and even. "You don't get to choose the things people cling to in the middle of chaos. You just respect them." There was a pause before she asked, "What did the neighborhood teach you?" He exhaled lightly, like the answer was sitting just behind his ribcage. "The healing doesn't always look like therapy or time. Sometimes it looks like murals on a broken fence, a porch rebuilt, a potluck on a sidewalk." He smiled again, this time with warmth that reached his eyes. And sometimes it's just showing up with a rolled poster and listening. The room settled into stillness, the kind that didn't ask for filler or follow-up questions, the kind that felt whole. But the journalist wasn't done yet. "There was a note, wasn't there?" she asked gently. "On the poster?" Keanu nodded, the memory pulling him somewhere deeper. "I wrote, 'For the fighter in the fire, Neo believes in you, so do I.'" He gave a small shrug. "It just felt right." "Do you think she knew it was from you?" "I think she knew it was from someone who saw her," he said. And that, in his mind, was enough. They sat like that for a few more minutes, letting the conversation breathe. The cameras rolled, but no one moved. Eventually, the journalist closed her notepad and whispered, "Thank you, not for the interview, for the silence you give people." Keanu smiled again, quieter this time. "Hey, give it to me too." She didn't ask him anything else. The camera faded slowly to black as the ambient sound of distant wind played in the background. And just before the transition ended, Keanu's voice came through, barely audible, almost like a final thought. "Sometimes hope doesn't look like light. Sometimes it looks like someone sitting beside you in the dark." Weeks later, the interview aired online with no special promotion, no clickbait title, no sensational headline, just a conversation with Keanu Reeves. But something about it resonated. Within hours, comment sections began filling, not with celebrity gossip, but with stories. Real ones. A woman from Idaho wrote, "I watched this while sitting in a shelter. I cried because someone finally said the quiet part out loud. Healing looks different for all of us." A teacher from Tennessee posted, "I showed this to my class. We talked about what it means to be present. One of my students said, 'Being kind is like being a superhero, just without the cape.' I'll never forget that." And beneath it all, pinned by the platform's algorithm but untouched by any marketing team, was a simple comment from a man named Greg Jenkins. "I was the old guy who told him we didn't want handouts, just hope, and somehow he gave it, without saying a word." The comment received thousands of likes, but Greg never replied again. That was the thing about the story. It didn't scream, it didn't sell, it simply stayed. A few days after the interview aired, Keanu received a package in the mail from a return address in Santa Clarita. Inside was a single photograph, Martha's rebuilt living room. On the wall behind the couch hung the signed Matrix poster, now in a new frame. Below it sat a small wooden shelf with the carved fox and Leo's Polaroid taped to its edge. On the back of the photo, written in Leo's handwriting, "You didn't just give us back our walls, you gave us back our future." Keanu placed the photo on his bookshelf, beside a few dog-eared poetry collections and a faded photograph of his sister when they were kids. He didn't call, didn't write back. He just sat for a long time that night, looking at the photo. Not like a trophy, not like a memory, but like a reminder. A reminder that sometimes the most powerful things you can offer another human being are presence and belief. Later, when a friend asked him what the best part of the Santa Clarita visit was, Keanu didn't mention the poster, or the rebuilding, or even the community dinners. He said, "It was when I saw her hang that picture again, not because I gave it to her, but because she believed she could. That was enough." The tree was planted on a cloudless Saturday morning in late spring. A modest crowd had gathered at the edge of Sunny Hill Park, just a few blocks from Martha's rebuilt home. There was no big announcement, no media vans or ribbon-cutting ceremony, just neighbors folding chairs and a wheelbarrow holding a tall young oak. It wasn't about spectacle, it was about roots. A small plaque had already been placed in the soil, its engraving simple and direct. "For the stranger who showed up and everyone who stayed." Mr. Jenkins stood beside it, holding a watering can. His joints ached, but his heart felt light. "Let's give it a good start," he said as he poured water onto the fresh earth. "It's got a big job to do." Leo helped pat the dirt around the trunk while Evie added a small handmade sign with a crayon drawing of a fox. The symbol had taken on a quiet life of its own in the neighborhood. No one said Keanu's name. They didn't have to. That tree wasn't just for him. It was for every person who had carried another, for every act of unspoken kindness, for every neighbor who had passed down a warm plate or loaned a generator or shared their only extension cord when the streetlights were gone. And slowly, the park changed. Within a week, a bench was placed under the tree, just an old iron one repainted by Martha and a few other neighbors. A stack of free books in a waterproof bin followed, mostly donated paperbacks, a few children's titles, and a weathered copy of the Matrix screenplay that someone slid in as a joke. It was perfect. Kids started gathering there after school, not in loud crowds, but in pairs, sometimes alone. They'd read quietly, sit close, and watch the leaves move. It became a place to slow down, to listen, to be. Martha came often too, not always with a purpose. Sometimes with a book, sometimes with silence. One afternoon, a woman approached her, holding a baby on her hip and a folded eviction notice in her hand. She looked worn down, the way Martha had once looked in her neighbor's guest room, with nothing left but a dog and a backpack. Martha didn't hesitate. She didn't offer advice. She offered coffee. A few days later, she helped the woman sign up for emergency aid. They sat together, filling out forms, and as the baby slept on her shoulder, Martha thought of the night she first held that signed poster again and heard the words, "That life isn't gone, it just needs help standing again." Now, she was the one helping others stand. Word spread quietly that Martha was someone you could talk to. Not a counselor, not a fixer, just someone who'd been there and didn't flinch at the word loss. She began showing up at local meetings, city rebuild forums, housing support gatherings, neighborhood association check-ins. At first, she just listened. Then, one day, she raised her hand and said, "Maybe people don't need answers. Maybe they need a table, somewhere to sit, to say things out loud." The following week, she organized one. It wasn't fancy, a folding table in a church basement, a carafe of coffee, a few chairs. But they came. People showed up carrying everything from burnt photo albums to insurance paperwork to nothing at all but tired eyes. She didn't promise miracles. She just brought the same steadiness someone once gave her. That presence. Leo started joining her sometimes. He'd sit off to the side, working on homework or sketching. One evening, a boy his age walked in with his parents and sat near him. They didn't talk at first, just nodded. By the end of the night, they were laughing over a shared memory about fire alarms and Pop-Tarts. That's how it started. One night turned into a monthly meetup. The meetup turned into a small support network. And from there, something else grew. A quiet movement of people helping each other before the world told them they were allowed to. There was never a sign-up list, never a fee. Just people remembering that being seen mattered more than being saved. One evening, as the group wrapped up, a volunteer handed Martha a thank you card signed by some of the newer attendees. Inside, one message read, "This tree gave us more than shade. It gave us back our roots." She held the card in her hands a long time before folding it gently into her coat pocket. The next morning, she returned to Sunny Hill Park. The tree had begun to bloom, light green leaves catching the breeze like small paper wings. A child lay on the grass beneath it, reading aloud to her younger brother. Across the way, a woman braided her daughter's hair, humming softly. Martha sat on the bench and closed her eyes. She thought of the fire. She thought of the silence afterward. And then she thought of the knock on the door. The man with the soft voice and the poster who hadn't come to fix anything, just to remind her that someone still saw her. Now, she saw them. Later that week, a reporter reached out to do a small feature on the new community bench and reading spot beneath the tree. The article ran in the local paper under the title, "Hope Takes Root in Sunny Hill Park." It included a photo of the tree, the plaque at its base, and a small group of kids sitting under it reading. It wasn't flashy, but it was honest. Marta didn't appear in the photo. She'd asked the photographer to keep the focus on the space, not the story behind it. But tucked into the article was a quote from her. "People don't need to be saved, they need to be reminded they're not alone while they rebuild." That line made it to community boards all over town, printed on flyers, pinned on library corkboards, and even scribbled in chalk near the tree. Someone added it to the little lending library box that stood beside the bench. It was enough. That same weekend, Martha received a small package in the mail. No return address, just her name in neat handwriting. Inside was a framed photograph, the plaque at the base of the tree, and behind it a folded piece of parchment paper with a single sentence: "What grows from ash is not always fragile." She didn't need to guess who had sent it. She placed it on her mantle, beside the Matrix poster and the photo of her and Leo taken just weeks before the fire. In that photo, they were sitting on the porch steps, dog curled up beside them, the sky behind them smudged with late summer gold. She used to think everything before the fire was a before and everything after would be after. But now it all felt like one continuous story. Later that month, she helped organize a new project, a traveling resource van for families in transition. It would carry emergency supplies, local service information, and even a rolling bookshelf for kids. The name painted on the side? The Gift That Grows. Leo designed the logo, a fox curled beneath a leafy oak, its tail forming the shape of an open book. On the first day of the van's launch, the community gathered at the park. As speeches wrapped and laughter filled the space, Martha noticed a man at the edge of the crowd, wearing a baseball cap pulled low. He didn't wave, he just stood quietly, watching the kids chase each other around the tree. She didn't walk over, she didn't need to. She just smiled and whispered, "Still showing up." And then she joined the others, helping lift boxes into the van, laughing with neighbors, and offering something better than charity. She offered presents. Leo sat at the kitchen table, pencil in hand, chewing gently on the eraser as he stared at the blank page in front of him. The prompt for the scholarship essay was simple: describe a moment that changed your life. The problem wasn't finding a moment. It was choosing which one to tell. He glanced up at the wall in front of him. The Matrix poster hung there now, proudly framed and placed above the mantel. It had survived nothing, but it had come after everything, and that made it mean more than most people would ever know. He tapped the pencil once, then began to write. "My name is Leo Alvarez. I'm 17 years old, and I used to think the hardest part of life was starting over. But then I watched my mom do it. With nothing but ashes, a borrowed couch, and her belief that we weren't finished yet." He paused. Outside, the sounds of the neighborhood hummed softly. Kids biking, a lawnmower a few houses down, birds nesting in the oak by the park. Leo continued. "We lost everything in a house fire last year. Everything except our dog, a photo album, and each other. It was scary, it was confusing, but it wasn't the end." He wrote about the night they slept in a neighbor's guest room, the way his mom had held his hand when he couldn't sleep. The morning they went to the burnt lot and she knelt in the dirt, whispering that they'd rebuild. Not the house, the life. And then he wrote about the knock at the door. Not as a headline, not as a fanboy story, just as a memory. One day, someone I admired showed up, not with cameras or speeches. Just a quiet voice and a rolled-up poster. It wasn't what he brought. It was how he listened to my mom talk about her life, and how he told her it wasn't over. He didn't name Keanu in the letter. He didn't have to. This story wasn't about a celebrity. It was about how kindness moves through a room, how it sits with grief, and how it helps rebuild a porch. Not just with wood, but with words like, "I believe in you." Leo ended the letter the only way he knew how. "My mom didn't just survive a fire, she taught me what it means to rebuild. Some people believe in heroes. I believe in the ones who don't need to say it out loud." He folded the paper slowly and slid it into the envelope. And for a moment, he just sat there, staring at it, like it held more than words, like it held a thank you too big to speak. Martha found the envelope on the counter that evening, addressed to a scholarship committee, neatly stamped and sealed. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. The way Leo had sat a little straighter all afternoon, the way he moved around the house with quiet focus, it told her everything. She kissed the top of his head when she saw it and whispered, "I'm proud of you, kiddo." Leo nodded, not saying much, but he smiled, the kind of smile that meant something was still growing inside him. Later that week, after the letter had been sent off, Leo printed a second copy of his essay. Not for school, not for a contest. He placed it in another envelope, this one without a label, just a simple name written in block letters. Keanu. He hesitated before mailing it, not because he was afraid, but because it mattered. Eventually, he placed it in the mailbox, flag up, and walked away without looking back. That act, the letting go, felt like a kind of closure, but also a beginning. Miles away, weeks later, in a quiet room filled with morning light and books stacked in small, uneven piles, Keanu Reeves opened a plain envelope addressed in neat, teenage handwriting. He read the essay without rushing, each word steady, his eyes lingering on the final lines. Some people believe in heroes. I believe in the ones who don't need to say it out loud. He folded the letter once and placed it inside a small wooden box on a shelf by the window. Inside that box were other items. A music box from a girl named Claire. A faded bookmark, left on a set where a grieving fan had once visited. A tiny fox carving from a family in the desert. And now, this letter. He didn't call anyone, didn't post about it, didn't even tell his assistant. He simply ran his fingers along the grain of the box's lid and sat back, watching the wind move through the trees outside. The weight of the letter wasn't heavy. It was grounding, a quiet reminder of why presence mattered more than praise. In another corner of the world, Leo sat beside his mom on the porch swing they'd rebuilt together, the night cooling around them. He didn't know if Keanu had read the letter. He didn't need to. What mattered was that he'd written it, that he'd said what was in his heart, that someone out there had made space for them when everything else had fallen apart. Weeks later, Leo was called into the guidance counselor's office at school. He thought maybe it was about his grades or a missed assignment, but instead, Mr. Delaney handed him a cream-colored envelope with the school's logo stamped in gold. Leo opened it slowly, reading the first few lines aloud. "We are honored to inform you that you have been selected as the recipient of this year's Phoenix Rising Scholarship, awarded to students who embody resilience, leadership, and community spirit." His breath caught. For a long second, he didn't move. Martha cried when she read the letter at home that night, not because of the money, though that helped, not because of the title or the prestige, but because her son had told their story, not with anger or bitterness, but with grace. And someone had seen it. The community held a small celebration at the park near the tree. Teachers, friends, and neighbors gathered under the branches where stories had taken root. Leo read part of his letter aloud for those who hadn't heard it. When he got to the final lines, he paused. "Some people believe in heroes," he read slowly, then looked up. Across the crowd, a man in a baseball cap nodded once. No fanfare, no spotlight. Just a presence. Leo continued, "I believe in the ones who don't need to say it out loud." There was a hush, then a soft round of applause that wasn't loud but heartfelt. Afterward, Leo walked past the benches, past the lending library box, now full of books with folded pages and margin notes. He stopped at the tree and touched the plaque gently. For the stranger who showed up and everyone who stayed. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, feeling the sun filter through the leaves, the light catching the gold of the letters like a quiet benediction. And miles away, on another quiet morning, Keanu opened the wooden box again. He took out Leo's letter, unfolded it, and read it one more time. He kept coming back to the same sentence, not because it praised him, but because it didn't try to. It has told the truth. He placed the letter back and closed the box. On the lid, someone had once carved a small symbol, two joined hands, simple and unadorned. For him, it wasn't a collection of memories. It was a reminder that the smallest gestures, the ones no one sees, can ripple through lives like wind through leaves. And that sometimes, when we show up without asking to be seen, we leave behind something unforgettable. The sun had barely crested over the rooftops when Martha stepped outside with her coffee. The street was unusually quiet for a weekday morning. No construction noise, no delivery vans rumbling past. Just the soft rustle of wind and the faint sound of chalk scraping concrete. She turned toward the sidewalk and stopped. It started at her driveway, a small heart drawn in bright pink chalk with the words written beside it. "Thank you for seeing us." She blinked, unsure if her eyes were playing tricks on her. But as she stepped further out, she saw it wasn't just one message. The entire block had become a canvas. Hope lives here. We remember. Mio was here. Heroes don't wear capes, they show up. Each message was drawn in different handwriting, scrawled in rainbows of color. There were pictures, too. Stick figures holding hands, trees with swirling leaves, small homes with smiling suns above them. A fire drawn in orange with a line through it. Then, a house drawn beside it, standing tall with a heart on the roof. Kids were crouched on the pavement with buckets of chalk and wide grins on their faces, proudly working beside each other. Leo emerged next, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He followed his mom's gaze and smiled. Across the street, Mr. Jenkins stepped onto his porch with a mug and gave her a nod. She waved back, eyes misting. Down the street, a group of kids finished a message in big, bold letters. "Thank you for the second chance." It was the kind of moment you don't plan, the kind that comes only after storms, when everything broken has already begun to mend. And then, without fanfare or engine roar, a car approached. A dark sedan, nothing flashy. Keanu was behind the wheel. He slowed as he passed, window cracked, sunglasses low on his nose. He saw the chalk. Every word, every drawing, every color stretched across the pavement like a mural made of gratitude. His gaze swept over the kids, the parents watching from their porches, the rebuilt homes with wind chimes swaying softly in the morning breeze. He didn't stop. He didn't wave, but he smiled. And that smile, quiet and full, said everything. This wasn't about him. It never had been. It was about what stayed behind after someone showed up, listened, and left room for others to rise. The sedan eased around the corner and disappeared. The chalk stayed. By late morning, more neighbors had joined. Parents brought coffee. Teens showed up with Bluetooth speakers playing soft music. Even Mr. Jenkins, cane in hand, stepped carefully along the sidewalk and handed out extra chalk to the little ones. Someone had written, next to the mural of a burning house. The fire didn't win. Martha stood back and watched. She didn't direct. She didn't supervise. She just took it all in. Leo wandered over to a group of younger kids and crouched beside them. One of them asked, "Can I draw a fox?" He nodded. Claire liked foxes, so did Keanu. The girl, no more than 7, began sketching with orange and white, her tongue sticking out in concentration. Further down the block, someone added, "Kindness doesn't burn." Another drew a silhouette with a guitar on his back and the words, "He listened." The sidewalk was no longer concrete. It had become a story, a timeline of loss and recovery, a canvas of moments that once seemed too small to matter, but now meant everything. News hadn't picked it up. There were no cameras, no drones flying overhead, no reporters shoving mics in people's faces. But someone had posted a picture of the chalk messages with the caption, "Real heroes don't ask to be noticed. They leave places better than they found them." By afternoon, that post had spread, not as a trending topic, not even viral, but as a ripple, a quiet one, the kind that moves slower but deeper. Martha's porch had become a meeting place again. Someone brought lemonade, someone else brought folding chairs, a few neighbors dug through their garages and pulled out pots of leftover paint. "We can do the fence next," one woman said. "I've got a ladder," another man offered. The chalk drawings weren't just drawings anymore. They were inspiration, permission, proof that what started as one fire didn't have to end in ashes. Martha sat on the edge of the porch, elbows on her knees. She watched her son, surrounded by children, his hands now covered in streaks of blue and yellow. He wasn't talking much, but his eyes, those told the whole story. Behind him, someone had drawn a large message in thick white chalk, outlined in red. "This is what rising looks like." It wasn't tagged. It wasn't signed. But everyone who passed by paused and looked and smiled, because they knew. Later that evening, just before the sun dipped behind the hills, Leo wandered out alone with a piece of chalk in his hand. Most of the day's drawings had faded slightly, dulled by footsteps and the soft brushing of wind, but their presence lingered. He crouched near the edge of the street, right where the curb met the cracked sidewalk in front of their rebuilt home. With slow, careful strokes, he wrote his final message of the day. "You didn't have to stop. We're glad you did." He stared at the words for a while, then stood and dusted his palms on his jeans. From across the street, Martha watched him. She didn't call him in. She didn't interrupt. Some moments needed room to breathe. At that same hour, miles away, Keanu sat on a balcony at his hotel, sipping tea and staring at the horizon. He hadn't told anyone he went. He hadn't taken photos, hadn't shared the story, but he thought about that street. The way it had burned, the way it stood again. He remembered the chalk, the colors, the laughter, the lines like brushstrokes in a mural only the heart could interpret. And that final message at the corner, the one he hadn't needed to read aloud. "You didn't have to stop, we're glad you did." He didn't need applause for that. He didn't want thanks. What mattered most was the life it helped shape, the hope it restored. Back in Santa Clarita, the street began to quiet. Porch lights flicked on, kids were called in for dinner. The chalk would remain overnight, maybe until the next rain washed it clean. But even if it disappeared from sight, the words had already done their work. In the morning, Martha would step outside again, coffee in hand, and see that Leo had drawn something new below his message. A small blue fox. No name, no explanation. Just a symbol that had traveled from a hospital reading room to a carved statue to the sidewalk of a rebuilt home. And beneath it, one last phrase, written in Leo's looping script. "You see us, we're still here." Keanu sat at a small roadside cafe just outside Santa Clarita, tucked beneath a faded red awning. The late afternoon sun dipped low, casting soft shadows across the wooden table where his tea had long gone cold. In his hands was a folded letter. The paper had been opened and closed so many times, the creases had nearly worn through. It was Leo's letter, the one about his mother, her courage, and the quiet aftermath of a fire that had once threatened to take everything. Keanu read it again. The words weren't elaborate. They didn't need to be. They were true. "My mom didn't just survive a fire. She taught me what it means to rebuild." He paused on that line for a long time. The sound of cars rolling by faded into the background. A breeze stirred the corner of the letter as he read the last part aloud, just above a whisper. "Some people believe in heroes. I believe in the ones who don't need to say it out loud." He folded the letter carefully, as if it were something fragile. Then he reached into a satchel by his chair and pulled out a small wooden box, plain on the outside but worn smooth by time. Inside were a few keepsakes: a photo of Claire from a hospital reading room, a crayon fox from a young girl he'd once visited in silence, a note from a shelter founder that simply said, "You saw me." Keanu placed Leo's letter on top of the others and closed the box. Across the street, children were drawing again. They didn't know who he was. They weren't waving or asking for selfies. They were simply doing what kids do, leaving messages in the only language that still felt pure: chalk and joy. One of them bent down and wrote, kindness makes color. Keanu smiled softly, then stood and walked toward the parking lot, the wooden box tucked under his arm. Far away, in that same neighborhood that had once turned to ash, a little girl knelt on the pavement in front of her home. She carefully traced a pink heart on the sidewalk. Then, beside it, she drew a small fox. Her dad stood nearby, watching in quiet admiration. He didn't ask why she chose that animal. He didn't need to. On the porch behind her, the fox statue rested exactly where Keanu had left it months ago. The eyes carved into the wood seemed to watch the street, not as a warning, but as a witness. Inside the house, Martha lit a candle on the windowsill. Leo stood beside her, watching the light flicker. The Matrix poster now hung framed in the living room, just above the fireplace. But more than that, the house was full again. Not of things, but of people. Laughter, shared meals, restored hope. Martha stepped outside, mug in hand, and joined her son on the porch. "You think he'll ever come back?" Leo asked softly. "I don't think he ever really left," she said. Down the street, Mr. Jenkins watered the flowers along his rebuilt fence. Teenagers painted over the last charred patch of wall with new vines and gold stars. A mother lifted her toddler and pointed to the sidewalk chalk with a smile. In one window, a child sat reading a book, with a note tucked inside the cover that said, "This place is built on second chances." In another home, a family sat down to dinner around a reclaimed wooden table. And somewhere far off, Keanu drove alone on a quiet road as the narrator's voice returned. Not loud, not commanding, but full of that same stillness that had settled over the studio all those months ago. Sometimes, the smallest moments, a poster, a knock, a chalk drawing, become the things we carry forever. A pause, a breath. Then came the gentle invitation. If this story moved you, share it with someone who might feel forgotten, not for clicks, for heart. And after another pause, because you never know when kindness will set fire to hope in the best way. The screen softened. A final shot, a child drawing a heart on the sidewalk while the fox statue watched silently from the porch, bathed in golden light. Fade to black. And just before it ended, one final line appeared on the screen in quiet white text. To those who show up without being asked, thank you.